Tonight, I'm joined by 4 experts who are actively coordinating across government levels and community organizations to turn energy policy into real solutions for Philadelphia residents. I'm June, your moderator, and I'm excited to facilitate this discussion between our panelists and all of you. Let's start with intros, but before we do, as we go on, you might see some QR codes like the one behind me here. Those are also posted in the hallways out there. So please, if you have any questions during this panel discussion, scan one of those, send your question, and I will receive it here. If you see a question you like, please upvote it, and that will be the determining factor for which ones get read in the allotted time. All right. So let's meet the people who are working on the issues and understand the expertise each person brings to tonight's conversation.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Or do I need to project more? Okay. Hi, I'm Maddie Shu. I am the City Energy Manager in the City of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability, Division of Energy and Climate Solutions. And so I work on municipal energy management, working to achieve the 4 goals in the Municipal Energy Master Plan. So that's reducing the city's carbon emissions, energy use, procuring 100% renewable electricity, and then maintaining or reducing the cost of our utilities.
And I'm Steve Petro. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania House Energy Committee. It's my job to shepherd legislation through the Pennsylvania House and then hopefully into law, for the state. I spend most of my day talking to environmental leaders, labor leaders, energy lobbyists, and also our members in the Pennsylvania House to try to figure out, what they need so that we can get bills into law.
I'm Divya Desai. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Co-op. We're a retail supplier that serves the Philadelphia area and beyond. The Energy Co-op serves Philadelphia by offering 100% renewable energy options. But more importantly, we're a nonprofit and a cooperative. And so a lot of what we do is a commerce being tied to a cause. We educate to empower. We use transparency to build trust with our members. And a lot of what we're now working on is more in advocacy and trying to build momentum behind a clean energy future.
And hi, everybody. My name is Grace Hancock. I'm a Policy and Partnerships Manager with the Philadelphia Energy Authority. The Energy Authority is a quasi-governmental entity who seeks to provide clean, affordable energy access to everyone in Philadelphia. We do that in 2 ways. One of them is by fulfilling our 10-year energy campaign to bring $1 billion in clean energy investment into the city of Philadelphia. And generate 10,000 clean energy jobs through that investment. We're well on our way. And then number 2 is to administer innovative consumer-facing programs that expand that energy access for the residents of Philadelphia, for the workers of Philadelphia, and to the businesses of Philadelphia.
Thank you. I really appreciate you all letting our audience get to know who you are a little bit, but let's dive even deeper. So we often hear about some gridlocking within the government, but it takes coordination across local, federal, state levels. Just curious, where do you see the most success in translating policy into action for Philadelphia residents from your perspectives right now? And this is open to any of you to take. I can also be a little more specific. So, Steve, you work directly with Chair Fiedler on energy legislation in Harrisburg. With Democrats controlling the House by 1 seat, how do you move energy policies that are benefiting?
I wish I had a really good answer for that. I think, we have to work, we work really hard to try to find areas of agreement and areas of where folks are willing to compromise. We have a 1-seat majority in the House. We have a Senate that's controlled by the Republicans. I think it's really challenging right now. I think the the Republican Party is led by Donald Trump, and right now, he's somewhat idiosyncratic in some ways, but it's pretty clear that he does not like solar and wind. I think for a long time, our strategy was to try to bring as much federal money through the IRA, through the IIJA, back to Pennsylvania. And then, we saw the IRA, if not eviscerated, sharply curtailed this spring. And so we're changing our strategy and we're trying to figure out, what to do next. I'm working on bills to look at things like geothermal, thermal energy networks, enhanced geothermal, next generation nuclear technology, data center regulations. I mean, we're looking for areas where, we think there's going to be some bipartisanship because we know it's going to be difficult to move legislation. So solar and wind, a little bit out in terms of my portfolio, and instead looking at some other ideas.
I will also say, so in kind of the light of some of the federal funding being, revoked or clawed back, there have been a lot of philanthropic groups that have been trying to fill that gap and being agile in how they're either designing grants or, recognizing that some of these issues exist. And so, the city has been trying to take advantage of that. And there's, local philanthropic organizations that have been, putting out grants. And so we've been trying to take advantage of those to help fill some of the gaps.
Yeah, I guess I'll add a little bit there just from a consumer perspective. It's interesting because in the policy landscape, it often feels unapproachable from a consumer's perspective. And there's a lot that consumers can do, particularly energy consumers who are deeply impacted by the federal landscape and the state landscape and the local landscape. There is a lot that energy consumers can do. From an organizational perspective, to kind of talk about what you were talking about, Maddie, there are a lot of organizations doing a lot of really incredible work. And not just, so there are organizations focused on education to help consumers navigate the policy landscape, understand what energy policy looks like and how to interpret it. And then there's a lot going on in the advocacy and mobilization space. There's so many organizations that are doing incredible work. I can name a few, but there are just so many in Philadelphia and the greater Philly area. And so I think, there's sort of, and it's not just on the, on the energy consumer to do it themselves, but there are a lot of opportunities to take advantage of where you can educate yourself or engage in an organization that provides educational opportunities. The Energy Co-op, for example, provides a lot of free educational content to learn about policy, to learn about opportunities to get involved as a consumer. And a lot of that has to do with, my colleagues up here and the work that they're doing, but also with a lot of the organizations that are doing the incredible work that Millie referred to.
Yeah, and I can speak from the implementer perspective. Like I mentioned, the Energy Authority has many consumer-facing programs that it administers to expand that clean energy access, especially that affordability component. And we really rely on what's happening or not at the state and federal level. And in some cases, parts of the Inflation Reduction Act that have been attempted to be rolled back are underway here in Philadelphia. And so I think about the home energy rebates that were approved at the federal level. They're on their way. They're going through the approval process at the state level, and Philadelphia is ready to integrate those into PEA's Built to Last program, for instance, which is a local home repair program for low-income residents. I think about, you said, Steve, solar is out on your portfolio, but we are still reveling in the success of Solar for Schools. And that grant program, which is coming to Philadelphia very soon. We're excited to see that launch. And it's really because of local, state, and federal coordination that makes these kinds of opportunities blossom. And even in the face of challenges, I think that tightens those relationships that are built during the not so lean years.
I'm curious to know, Grace, if you are finding that there are any coordination challenges beyond just what is happening at the federal level for some of these programs?
I think that I would echo what Divya said, that there are many organizations who are doing really great work, and that can sometimes end up being, how many cooks are in this kitchen kind of situation. And so I think there's always a challenge of coordination. This really is a movement of people to dream up clean energy policy, to implement clean energy policy, and to make sure that it's helping the people who need it the most. So from that perspective, I think that the coordination challenges and opportunities really remain no matter what's going on at the federal level.
That kind of reminds me of some of our previous discussions when you mentioned energy burden and it not really mattering who is in power and when it still remains. I want to take a moment to hop back to what you were saying before, Steve, with AI data centers and your work and how it intersects with that. Pennsylvania just announced over $90 billion in AI and data center investments. It was probably in July, I believe. And there's new legislation to fast track their development. These facilities can consume as much electricity as some cities. And I'm curious, how do we balance economic development with protecting residents from the skyrocketing energy costs?
I think it's a challenge. I think one thing that we're trying to do in the committee, and we have there's other legislation that's been introduced in the House pretty recently by Representative Matsey, who's the former chair of the Consumer Protection Committee. And it's legislation that's really focused on protecting ratepayers from soaring costs. I think we saw in Texas, and we've seen in some other states, that there have been successful bills that have made it through the legislature to protect consumers. I think there is consensus with Democrats and Republicans on costs, and that we have to lower costs for people. I think the strategy sometimes is different. That bill that Chair Matsey has is a bill that would put some guardrails on data center developers. I think part of what we're trying to do is that developers and companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they have a tremendous amount of money, on hand. And when they look to develop a data center, they're really looking for certainty. And they've been willing to make a lot of commitments to communities when they've come in. I think that, in terms of workforce development, in terms of paying for transmission and distribution lines, in terms of putting down capital so there aren't stranded costs, Chair Matsey's bill has a provision that would, add money to the LIHEAP fund so that, people can, get grants to afford their rising energy costs. I think the goal would be to make sure that the big companies that, and the commitments that they've made is kind of the floor, right? And to kind of try to raise all the developers up to that level. I think one thing that we're concerned about is that there's also a lot of data center development that's just on spec. People coming in, building a data center, claiming that they're going to sell it. And those developers don't really have any obligation to the communities around them. And so the impacts on water, on noise, on rising energy prices, they're just not really going to care about those. So I don't think that we can stop data centers. Like, no one's going to, not do video conferencing and, and stream their movies on Netflix. But at the same time, I think there are some appropriate guardrails that we can put in place that frankly, both Republicans and Democrats would agree on.
I guess add, I don't know if this addresses the exact question, but I did want to just add a little bit to that. I think did you want to?
No, I was, definitely going to.
Okay, great.
Steve.
I think that there's, when we think about data centers and AI, they're sort of there are a couple of important things to consider. One is the supply-demand disparity. Stephen referred to that already, but data centers drive a lot of demand, and there's a lot of speculation about what that could do to capacity in PJM region and beyond. Certainly, beyond PJM is not the only place that will hold data centers, but there's also a disproportionate impact that data centers have on the needs of the grid, energy costs, reliability, and there's there hasn't been an adequate way to address how those impacts are being addressed and who's to take the responsibility of those. And I think House Bill 1834 is in that direction. Whereas I'm going to forget the name of or the number of the other one, but the Senate Bill 939, something like that, is sort of talks a lot more about the opportunity, the economic opportunity of data centers. It is important to be talking about the economic opportunity, and there's probably something in between the two that is a sensible approach. But a lot of, what Stephen referred to is there are a lot of concerns around what could happen. And, how do we hold data centers, developers, large companies accountable for the impact that they'll have on grid, on ratepayers and costs. What's interesting is AI poses a very interesting solution to a lot of the capacity problems as well. AI as a technology poses quite a lot of potential solution for capacity issues. So I think that there's this sort of, again, I'll sort of go back to what I said. There's probably somewhere in between these two bills that are quite opposing that could serve as a solution to move forward and make progress.
Yeah, I'll just say that neither one of those bills is going to sail through the legislature as is. It's just not how things work in Pennsylvania, at least. I've never seen a bill move like that. These are going to be really complicated bills. I think there's also probably going to be a dozen bills that are introduced. Matsy's bill is really focused on protecting ratepayers, and they were really clear with our office that that's what they were trying to do. But there's going to be bills to protect water impacts and bills on community impacts and zoning, and there's going to be all kinds of things. And all of those bills are going to have to go through the legislative process. We'll see what has support and what doesn't have support. And in the end, it'll probably be a big omnibus if we can get something over the line.
I'm curious, Grace, how Philadelphia Energy Authority is factoring in these large demand changes and in terms of implementation, and this is kind of toward you as well, Maddie, when it comes to the way that the city is approaching procurement. So what are you finding is the game plan, so to speak?
Yeah, I can speak to PEA's programs. So we, as I have alluded to, we run consumer programs. We have a home repair program called Built to Last, which, to your earlier question on coordination, we coordinate 12 different programs to bring holistic home repair and ensure that every home that needs it, is able to access the dollars that they need to. We often layer our sibling program, Solarize Philly, with Built to Last, which brings stable, affordable, clean energy to these low-income homes. And so that's one way we do it, is we hedge against the potential future price of electricity for low-income residents to ensure that they always have a stable supply at a rate that they can afford. For our commercial programs, we are the administrator for Philadelphia's CPACE program, commercial clean energy program. I always forget what the acronym is. But it's the same there. We can provide technical advice to our clients in that space to advise them on clean energy procurement via the open market that Pennsylvania has. And I think that's probably the great opener for you, Maddie, to talk about how the city approaches that open market.
Yeah, so the city is a large user and a large customer. We're able to hedge a lot of our cost and a lot of our use in the in the market. And so that's one way that we're managing costs, is making sure that we are proactively hedging so that we kind of know our costs, a year or two out. The other thing that we're doing is we participate in a number of different programs that are administered by PJM, so our grid operator. And so those are programs like demand response, which is, when there's a lot of, use on the grid, we reduce our use, and it helps save the city money, but it also helps ensure that there's enough electricity out there for everybody who does need it, who isn't a large customer. And then we also do other programs that are, really meant to kind of bring down those peaks, like, in the summer when it's a really hot day, and the grid, everybody's using their air conditioning and all those kind of things, so that we're reducing our use during those times to help kind of manage some of those costs and also just the amount of electricity that's out there. I would say the other thing that we're doing is, looking at renewables. So we have a 70 megawatt solar array that's out in Adams County. And so that kind of provides a 20-year hedge for the city for that portion of our electricity. And then we're also looking at other renewables, right? So how can we kind of manage those costs and manage, our use so that we're not necessarily dependent on just what's currently available on the grid.
Thank you. So we already started touching on it a little bit, energy burden, and there are a lot of amazing programs that are already addressing this. I would like to just throw this stat out there so that we can dive into it a little bit more. So we have roughly a quarter of low-income households in Philly that pay at least 20% of their household income on energy bills. And so from each one of your perspectives, let's just continue drilling in, like, what are the things that some of these folks can do, like, this week to start to seek out services to help with this before it potentially gets worse?
If I can start. So one, I'll plug PEA, right? So going through PEA's programs. But another one is getting involved, right? So understanding when utility rate cases are happening and, getting involved with organizations that are advocating for residents to make sure that voices are being heard. And then also when there is public comment, there are open meetings, right, attending those and, voicing concerns, because nothing is as impactful as a resident speaking about what's going on in their day-to-day life. That's more impactful than a city administrator, saying what's going on. And so I think those are a few ways to kind of really address that in the short term. But yeah, I think PEA's programs are also a great avenue.
Yeah, I can say a little bit more. So, I'm thinking about what work gets done in Philadelphia. I've talked about Built to Last, Solarize Philly, but I also think about who does that work and who gets paid to do that work. And so another avenue that PEA takes to really wrestle with this affordability question is our workforce development programs. So we do have our GRIT program, which is Green Retrofit Interns in Training. And these are young people who are often living in the most energy burdened neighborhoods who get trained on residential renovation. They get OSHA credentialed. They do hands-on learning with HVAC programs at one of our partners, Heat Pump Training Lab, which is really exciting. And then they graduate and they get to go take a job in the solar industry, in the home energy efficiency industry, in the HVAC industry. And they're often able to work on projects that are in their own neighborhoods. They're able to work on projects with people that they know, because we're working in these low-income neighborhoods with the residents there. And that makes a big difference. There's a tangible pride that comes with that, in addition to money in people's pocket to pay these increasing bills, and stability on the bills for the people getting the work done. So I think that's an important component too, is how do we make sure that the people benefiting from our energy industry, however it looks like, are the ones who, are everybody, that it's not closed to any group that otherwise deserves to be at the table.
I'll just add that, if there are folks that are really having trouble paying their bills, the state representative offices, there's one in every district. There's 25 state representatives. They have constituent service representatives that are trained to help people apply for LIHEAP, for crisis grants, things of that nature. When I worked in the district office, every day somebody came in looking for help, and we were usually able to either get them into a program or a payment plan, or refer to them to community legal services. If if the crisis was acute. And, we work with CLS all the time, and they do amazing work. Those are some avenues that people can get help. And then sometimes we would also connect them with the councilman's office, because there are some programs in the city too that your district council people can help ordinary people with when they're facing difficult times.
I'll add one thing to sort of piggyback on what Grace was saying, just about there are a lot of neighborhood energy centers available with a lot of resources that can help consumers navigate difficult energy issues or situations. And so those are great resources. We've worked with Southwest CDC, but there are a ton of them around the city. I think there are 16 or 17. A lot, yeah, and they're excellent resources. They're there to help consumers and residents of those neighborhoods, and highly recommend sort of touching base with those if you need support in thinking about your energy costs and needs. I think there's also, to sort of talk a little bit about what Stephen and Maddie both alluded to. There is an advocacy angle here, a sort of a consumer advocacy angle, where you as a consumer can voice your opinion and make your voice heard. There are a lot of issues that sort of lead into energy burden, capacity. I mean, demand is outpacing supply, and it's speculated to get worse, to call back to our conversation about data centers. There are outdated regulatory constructs that impede progress, and capacity, capacity is not getting better. It's getting worse for lots of reasons. And, a lot of this kind of comes back to, well, who has the ability to impact that? And really, it comes down to the state and to the sort of the regional regulatory bodies. And there's a lot that individuals, businesses, consumers in general can do to advocate for change at the state level, to advocate for change at the regulatory level. PJM is the RTO, the Regional Transmission Organization that runs the grid that we all live in. And Pennsylvania State is the state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And they both have a responsibility to ratepayers and to shoulder the burden that is placed on a lot of these communities. And so there's a responsibility there. And I think as consumers, as folks living in communities, whether they are energy burdened communities or not, we have the power to make a difference and sort of hold regulators and legislators accountable. So
that's exactly where I wanted to go next. I'm curious if anyone else could speak to what more residents could do to advocate for solutions.
Yeah, so I think one is definitely public comment. So, the utilities in our area, PECO and PGW, and then, PWD, the water department, they all do rate cases, which is basically where they say our costs have gone up, and to be able to deliver the same amount of service, like, we have to increase our rates. So those happen every few years, and those are public forums. And so that is a place for residents to come and, express their concerns, their issues, whatever that might be. There's also, the advocates who represent resident groups that are at those things. But those are definitely places to make comment and have voices heard. And then there's also at kind of the state level, there's the Public Utility Commission that does also have public comment. Again, that gets more technical because it is, at the state level doing regulatory kind of management. But those are forums for residents and people within the state to have their voice heard and express how whatever is being discussed impacts them on a very, very individual level. And people at those levels always want to hear what's going on, because otherwise they're just hearing from utility companies or, large corporations or, legislators. And so having the voice of individuals is very important in those situations. So I do think that those are places for people to kind of be active.
I'll just say that, I think it's important to ally yourself with groups that are doing the advocacy work. Power is organized people, and organized money. And I do think it's good when someone goes before the PUC and they're an individual that cares about these issues and they issue a public comment. But that's pretty rare. Usually they need support from a group like the Public Utility Law Project, who I talk to all the time. If there's a consumer issue at the PUC, I'm going to call Patrick Cicero or Liz Marks, and I'm going to get their opinion on it. And that's probably going to be our opinion in the Pennsylvania House. We trust them, and they've organized a lot of people, and they have a lot of expertise. The environmental groups too. They organize people on the ground to fight for decarbonization, to fight for a cleaner environment. Donating money to them is one way of getting involved, but also they often have outreach folks that are trying to figure out ways to utilize people power too. So get involved politically. I would say, if you care about these issues, with groups that are involved and know the legislature and council.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, please. I'll echo what Steve said, that I think there's a real social component here and a real power in being together with one voice. The Energy Authority works regularly with our environmental advocacy groups. Philly Thrive comes to mind, Power Interfaith. They hold us to account. They make sure that we're meeting our mission of affordable, clean energy for the people who need it most. So the members of those groups, the spokespeople for those groups, people listen. And so I would definitely echo, don't feel like you have to go it alone. Don't feel like you have to start over with a platform. There are folks who are thinking about this and have organized that foundational base that you can plug into and see fruits from your labor.
I think I was reading your mind because I was going to say the same thing. So I'll sort of add a little bit to that on the education front. As consumers, as people, as individuals, there are a lot of opportunities to become more educated in order to advocate and be involved with these organizations. A couple that come to mind are Kleinman Center at University of Pennsylvania. Penn Future does a lot of advocacy and education, and those are two of many. And if you're educated, you can, if each of us are educated, we can, be more involved and add to the conversation in a more substantive way.
I'll just add that, when I worked in the district office in Representative Fiedler's office, if we got 10 calls about one issue in a couple days, that usually meant that we would drop everything and focus just on that issue. Like, it was coming from constituents. Constituents have much more power than they probably think they do. That said, you calling Senator Pittman, across the state and saying, you want X, Y, or Z, he's probably not going to listen to you because you're not a constituent. But 15 people, in a district, or this works in council too. Most representatives are going to take notice, and they're going to try to figure out a way to satisfy your concern. So don't underestimate your power, especially if you can get your neighbors and friends and the other people who care about that issue to weigh in too.
Thank you. We touched on a lot so far with coordination, collaboration, policy, advocacy, resources. In the midst of it all, what is currently giving you hope about Philadelphia's energy future? It's probably not as morbid as it seems.
I'll start. Or did you want to go? Oh, gosh. I'm inclined to just go back to the consumer and say that it gives me hope that there are a lot of people out there, people that run businesses out there that, are willing to make the effort to move the needle, whether it's through advocacy, through voting with your dollars, just caring about our future, caring about, how important energy is to each of our lives and getting involved. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll just say that the work continues, whether there is an obvious reason to hope or not. The need continues, and I think that it's up to us to contemplate those creative solutions. Steve, mentioned a few in his work, and how can we really lean into our social connections, our professional expertise to meet this moment with resolve. And that gives me hope, knowing that we're up here, you're there, like there's a lot of minds that are thinking about these challenges. And so I feel optimistic from that perspective.
I can say, that I think that people care. I think people didn't necessarily care about energy before, not everyone, but some people didn't necessarily care about energy until capacity prices went sky high, and then their bills got really high. And so that people care. And so I think the fact that people care and are speaking out about the issues, that something's going to have to happen. And like Grace said, the work continues. And so it's just, finding the solutions to it. But that, people are mobilized.
I'll just say that in the long run, I think that there's been tremendous growth in the environmental movement. I was born in the 70s, and when I was young, the environmental movement was young too. It wasn't something that was thought of as a priority. We just had a president, not this president, but Joe Biden, that devoted all of his political capital really to passing a climate energy workforce bill. A pretty bold investment to address a really huge problem. I know it's contentious right now, and we're seeing a rollback, but at the same time, I think there's a tremendous amount of urgency out there from lots of people to address these issues. I know my daughter, who's 11, cares an enormous amount about climate and the planet, and wants to be part of the solution. And I think there's a lot of young people like that. And I think there's a lot of really smart people. I talk to the people at PEA all the time. They're incredibly bright. They're coming up with really creative solutions, to the problems that we're facing, even with a lack of resources. So, I think if you take the long view, we're moving in the right direction.
That's very promising to hear from the folks who are helping make things work. With that, I would like to shift us to Q&A. We have a few questions here. The first being, has there been any effort to require data center, I believe, developers to commit to deploying energy that is coupled with the project? I think this kind of sounds like it's maybe co-location or behind the meter. Yeah.
There has been, but I'd say data centers use an enormous amount of energy. You can, maybe it's a 100-acre campus, and you can build a pretty big array on a 100-acre campus, but it still probably wouldn't offset the energy that data center is using. I think there's maybe been more success in requiring those data centers to procure their energy from clean sources. Chair Matzey's Bill 1834 has a 25% procurement requirement of new data centers coming into Pennsylvania. That's a little bit better than what we have with the alternative energy portfolio standard that we currently have now. I don't know if 25% is realistic to get through the legislature. I don't know if it's not aggressive enough, too aggressive. We're going to have to go through the legislative process. And every state maybe has a different ability to do different things. But I think it's probably more important to have that kind of procurement standard than it is to co-locate on the site itself.
Yeah, I think additionality is a really important concept, and one that is pretty contentious in PJM just because of the interconnection delays. And so co-location is an interesting thought, especially because a lot of these, a lot of the companies that are going to be building and needing data centers have a lot of money. But the co-location, I think, poses a literal infrastructure challenge. And there's probably benefits to additionality that isn't necessarily just co-located with data centers that can serve the broader public as well. The sort of the broader energy grid as well. So yeah, there's a lot to consider there. But I would generally echo what Steve said.
The next question is there potential for Pennsylvania legislation for a New York, New Jersey style battery storage upfront or ongoing incentive/revenue certainty program for transmission, distributed, commercial and industrial, residential?
I mean, I say it's a big lift. It's a big lift. New York has a power authority. It's structured differently. Things change all the time. I think distributed energy is in a tough moment right now. But the incentives in the IRA for storage are still there. They weren't completely gutted with HR 1. So maybe there's some potential. But I think it's a big lift in Pennsylvania.
Anyone else? Okay. And next question, how do you see Philly managing grid reliability, especially at peak times as we transition to 100% renewables? It seems this is inspired by some New York City issues with retiring some of its generation.
So for the city, so I think most of ours, has to do with securing these long-term agreements that then within the contracts, they guarantee the delivery of the power. So that's kind of how we're going about it as, a city for municipal owned buildings. But yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I guess that's how we're kind of going about it for the city. But as a, larger, I guess that would be a PICO kind of question of how they're kind of ensuring reliability, which I think goes back to the legislature.
I think there's a lot of interest right now in getting more out of the grid that we have, and there's some really interesting ideas, grid enhancing technologies that could potentially pull down that peak where we see surges in energy prices. But and honestly, like some of the utilities, PPL, I think is actually kind of a leader in this, have been doing a good job, implementing these kinds of technologies. Some states have done a better job with sort of replacing transmission lines and making them, much more energy efficient. But, it's going to be a challenge. And I think that like the city of Philadelphia is going to maybe have a hard time sort of leading and reducing, demand during these sort of peak moments, when the grid includes 13 states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. There's the city of Philadelphia itself, I think, has limited ability to impact reliability outside of its sphere. And, the city does a lot to help demand, Maddie talked about demand response. But at the end of the day, the PJM grid, for example, is a sprawling grid. It's the second largest in the country, if I'm not mistaken. And it's not to overuse the word, but interconnected. And there's capacity, to Steve's point, the capacity is a really important piece here. Reliability. So if we think about renewables and reliability, in PJM, for example, renewables, the reliability index, there's sort of a rating on reliability for different fuel sources for generation, and both wind and solar were sort of demoted, if I could use that word, in terms of their reliability. A lot of that, some of it could be chalked up to bipartisan politics, but some of it is valid in terms of just like sheer technology. That's not to say that renewables are not really important and are not reliable, but there's a lot of controversy around that, and when we think about decommissioning generation facilities, PJM is very strained for capacity at the moment, and it's getting worse and worse by the day. And so a lot of what we have to think about as a region is what role do renewables play? And I think one important thing that is sort of not, we talk about it probably in our spheres, but it's not talked about more globally in sort of the conversations, particularly in a state where, quite frankly, fossil fuels run the conversation. But renewable energy has the ability to decrease energy costs, decrease energy burden, and if invested in properly, has the ability to alleviate capacity. If for example, interconnection delays were to stop, meaning if interconnection could be accelerated, a lot of the energy that would come online would be renewable. I think right now there's a projection that the vast majority of energy of capacity coming online next year will be solar. That's huge. And so if we could move that process forward, do it in a way that's reliable and appropriate, then we could see a lot of these capacity issues be mitigated, costs reduced. So there's a lot at play.
Yeah, and if I can, this is actually a pretty ripe opportunity. The PEA is deeply interested in distributed energy resources and how we can drive some of our investments in Philadelphia toward, can they be virtual power plants? And so this is something that we're actively and often in conversation with the PUC about, with PICO about. And I'm reminded that many of the things we're working on today were years or decades in the making through advocacy, through research, through case studies. And so I see this as one of those items that's really the next round of, now's our time to do that research, that relationship building, that making the case that renewables need to be here. They are the solution that can lower costs. So how do we compel those who are running our system to give it a shot and to do so seriously?
Do you want to explain what a virtual power plant is, Grace?
Not really.
Does anyone want to do that?
We're very interested in virtual power plants and potentially, requiring the EDCs to create more programs with VPPs. Basically, you think about your smart thermostat. Some people have them. You can maybe enter into a program where the utility during an emergency moment would actually remotely turn down your AC for a couple degrees, and then therefore reduce the stress of the whole system. That's sort of the idea. And then those people that participate in the program would get credited because they're also energy gets very, very expensive when you have to, bring it in from another grid, outside of PJM, which is what would happen in an emergency situation. So VPPs are a really interesting solution. Utilities, make money moving energy from point A to point B. And so, they're not always excited about these kinds of programs because it potentially reduces their profits. But there's definitely some interest in VPPs right now.
So going back to what Divya was saying earlier, it kind of segues into another popular question, which is, has there been any action taken to assist PJM with the interconnection backlog given the need for rapid deployment?
I think it depends on your opinion about whether PJM would take help. I will hold my comment. Steve, please.
No, I mean, there's pressure campaigns, right? I think part of the problem is that, PJM is, they're governed by their members, and their members are the utilities largely. So they're the ones making the decisions. Again, the utilities, their job is to move, energy from point A to point B. so the idea of solar, and distributed energy, people creating their own energy across the state, solar farms being built all across the state. That's probably not in, your utility's best interest, purely on a profit basis. And then, of course, like PECO has a parent, which is Exelon, which generates power too. So, if an individual is generating their own power, they're, in some ways competing with Exelon. So that's a challenge. There has been some legislation that has passed in a number of states, and we moved a bill through the House this session. It's sitting over in the Senate that would put some transparency on the decisions that are made at PJM, at kind of the lower level committees, and like force the EDCs or the utilities to explain their votes. That's legislation from Representative Rabb, who's up in Mount Airy, Chestnut Hill. That bill actually got a lot of bipartisan support in the House. I think about 40 Republicans voted for it on the House side. So maybe it's got a chance in some sort of trade as we get closer to a budget agreement. But other states have passed that kind of legislation. But we certainly need more transparency at PJM, and we need more pressure put on them to clear their queue and to bring more renewable sources online and into the grid.
Yeah, I'll sort of I think Steve brings up a lot of good points, and I think there are a couple of things. PJM at the end of the day, the PJM, the entity itself, the organizing or the organizing body are a group of individuals, and at the end of the day, there is limited bandwidth, and the interconnection queue grew exponentially over a very short period of time, and so there's justifiable reason for maybe not a freeze, but the delays, and that's a real problem. It's a good problem in the sense that there are so many projects that want to come online, but the other side of that is PJM is the body responsible for ensuring reliability on the grid, ensuring that projects come online, and so there is a responsibility that PJM has to ensure that the interconnection queue is cleared, and that projects make their way through in a way that is appropriate and responsible. And I think that some of this sort of comes back to what Steve was saying about transparency. A lot of what happens in PJM, there's a lot of things that happen at PJM that are publicly published, for example, things that happen in some of the committees. But there is a lot that's happening behind closed doors, or there's a lot of opacity. And I think that, transparency would help hold PJM accountable. I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with the governors of many of the PJM states. I actually don't know if it's all of them, but many of the PJM states came together and sort of wrote a letter to PJM to vie for state representation on behalf of ratepayers. And this is something that we, the Energy Co-op, feel very strongly about because our job is to advocate for consumers and for the ratepayers. But it's an important conversation to be had, which is what is the state involvement in RTOs like PJM, PJM is not held accountable to ratepayers. In some ways, the state is, and so there's justification for that conversation, and I think that this just goes back to transparency.
Okay, we have time for one, maybe two more. Next being, we've discussed a few programs that can help homeowners with their energy costs. Is there anything similar for renters in the city?
Well, I'll plug a program of a partner of PEA's. The Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation has a program called the Rental Improvement Fund, where landlords can receive loans with friendly terms to make home repairs to the properties that they own, and that does include energy efficiency improvements. So there are programs. Take a look around. PHDC Rental Improvement Fund is what I would book.
Okay. Next, do the panelists see local utilities continuing to discuss carbon reduction goals, and how can the city work with utilities to help shape these initiatives?
I mean, in the case of PGW, the PGW is owned by the city. And I think there's we haven't talked about gas at all on this panel. But, we have there are 6,000 miles of gas lines that PGW maintains. Most of them were built before World War II. And they are slowly replacing those lines, like 30, 50 miles a year, but there's 6,000 of them. There's also, a real campaign that's going on that's saying, spending the money that we're spending right now to replace all of those lines maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe what we should be doing is looking at like pilot programs for thermal energy networks, or, making sure that we move toward electrification. It is a challenge though, because, if you start to electrify people's heat, then you have a smaller and smaller number of ratepayers that are maintaining that system of all the gas lines. And that's a huge challenge. I personally think that we need some federal intervention in this kind of thing, and we need big federal dollars to come in and help us upgrade our infrastructure. But the mayor has control over PGW's board for the most part, and if she wanted to appoint some different board members, we could see PGW maybe move in a different kind of direction in terms of what they want to do with sustainability.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I think that's going to essentially be time. For those who didn't get your questions answered, by all means, find these folks during the networking time that will follow and ask those questions. There's something else in there about virtual power plants that I think is really fascinating. So as we wrap up, I'd like to hear from each of you. Complete this sentence. If you take away one thing from tonight's discussion, it should be...
Get involved.
I would just say that, join with others, and your power is working together.
Mine will sound very similar, but I think it's that you should be encouraged to get involved and to sort of make your voice heard, because collective action does make a difference.
Yeah, don't give up. There's work to do, so we need you working on it with us.
And that's an excellent note, I think, to end on, especially at this organization where we are hosting this event, PhillyCAM, which is all about people power. It's in the tagline, people-powered media. So by all means, please get involved. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank our panelists for such riveting conversation. It was very pleasurable speaking to you all. This is my first time doing this, and you all made it very easy. So thank you.
You did great.
Thank you. And with that, let's transition to networking.